Welcome to Watch Cozy.
Great to be here.
Today we're diving into the history of Japan. It's such a rich story, right? From ancient times all the way to, well, modern day.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating journey.
I've got a great overview to guide us, and the idea is really just to pull out the most interesting bits, the key moments, give you a solid feel for how things unfolded without getting totally bogged down.
Sounds good. Where should we start? Maybe the very beginning, how Japan even became, well, Japan.
Yeah, perfect. So it wasn't always islands.
Not exactly. You have to picture the end of the last ice age. Sea levels were much lower.
Okay.
So there were land bridges connecting it to the mainland, to Asia. But then the ice melted, seas rose.
And cut it off, creating the archipelago.
Precisely. And for thousands of years, the people there lived pretty simply, hunting, gathering, using basic stone tools,
Right.
Living off the land.
But then things started to change. Tech arrived from the outside world.
Exactly. Key things were metalworking, much better tools and weapons, and probably the biggest game changer, rice farming.
Ah, rice. I always hear how important that was. Why specifically rice?
Well, think about it. Rice paddies are incredibly productive. You can grow a lot of food in a small area compared to just hunting and gathering.
Rice plus food.
Bingo. And once you have surplus, suddenly the land you grow it on becomes valuable. Ownership matters.
So land equals power.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
It led to the first sort of kingdoms emerging. People controlling the best rice-growing land, had the resources, had the influence.
And these kingdoms weren't just tiny pockets, right? They started spreading.
Yeah, they spread across the islands. Different groups, different little kingdoms popping up, centered around this new rice agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, one group, led by the figure we now call the emperor, started to become the most prominent.
Okay, so we've got early kingdoms, the beginnings of an imperial line. What's next? Religion.
Right. A new religion gets introduced, apparently by a prince. It wasn't an overnight conversion for everyone, though.
More gradual.
Yeah, it sort of slowly gained ground, mixed with existing local beliefs. Shinto,
Mm-hmm.
It created this unique blend that really shaped Japanese culture and even politics.
And speaking of politics, wasn't there a shift in who was actually running the government around then?
Yes, exactly. Power moved to another group, and they brought in some major reforms, kind of like a shakeup.
Trying to organize things better.
Definitely. And they looked outwards for models, specifically to China.
Ah, the big neighbor.
Yep. They adopted quite a few ideas from the Chinese system of government, more centralized, more bureaucratic. It wasn't just copying, though. They were adapting it.
Interesting. And didn't they also get a new name from China? Or for themselves relating to China?
Sort of.
Mm-hmm.
They started referring to themselves in relation to China as the land where the sun rises, Nippon sunrise, a powerful image.
It really is. And the writing system, too. Borrowed from China.
Crucially, yes. They took Chinese characters and figured out ways to use them to write their own, very different Japanese language.
That must have been revolutionary. Suddenly you can record history, write literature.
Exactly. Their own stories, their own poems. It's fundamental for developing a distinct cultural identity. And this period also saw them establish a fixed capital city.
Instead of moving it every time an emperor died.
Right, which must have been chaotic. Having a permanent capital, like Nara and then Kyoto, brought stability. It became a center for arts, for literature. A real cultural flourishing happened then.
But it seems like the imperial court came maybe too into the arts and literature, a bit disconnected from ruling.
That's a fair assessment, based on what we see next. While the court was focused on refinement and culture, governing the provinces, maintaining order, that became less of a priority, it seems.
So if you're out in the provinces and the central government isn't really protecting you, what do you do?
You hire your own protection, and
Right.
that's where the samurai come in.
Ah, the warriors.
Initially, they were just private guards, hired swords for landowners or nobles, but over time, they became incredibly skilled, organized, and powerful.
More powerful than the government's own forces.
Eventually, yes. They evolved from hired security into the dominant military force. It's a classic pattern, really.
And they didn't just stay as bodyguards, they set up their own government.
That's the next huge shift. They established the shogunate, a military government. The shogun was the real power.
But what about the emperor?
Still there, still revered, very important, symbolically, religiously, but politically. The shogun held the reins. Think of it like a revered monarch versus a powerful prime minister or general.
Got it. So, military rule. Did that face challenges? I seem to remember something about invasions.
Oh yeah, the Mongols. Huge threat. They tried to invade Japan twice, massive fleets.
And failed. How?
Storms, huge typhoons, wrecked the Mongol fleets both times. The Japanese called them kamikaze divine winds.
Wow. Talk about luck or divine intervention, depending on your view.
It certainly became part of the national story, but even without Mongols, there was internal trouble. Power struggles continued.
Emperors trying to get power back from shoguns.
Yep, and vice versa. It led to instability, even a new shogunate being set up later in Kyoto. Politically, it was pretty turbulent.
But culture still thrived. That seems counterintuitive.
Remarkably, yes. This period, despite the fighting, saw amazing developments. Think landscape painting, unique forms of poetry like renga, no theater, the tea ceremony.
Zen gardens, architecture.
Exactly. It's like culture found its own space, even deepened, amidst the political chaos. A really rich cultural period.
But the political chaos didn't stop, did it? Didn't they end up fighting over who gets to be the next shogun?
They did. Succession disputes within the shogunate got really bad. So bad, in fact, that the palace in Kyoto was actually burned down during one conflict.
Yikes. So things fell apart.
Pretty much. The
Yeah.
country fragmented into warring states. Local lords, the daimyo, were basically fighting each other for land and power. A really chaotic period.
And right in the middle of all this fighting, Europeans show up.
Perfect timing, wasn't it? Initially, it was mostly Portuguese traders. They weren't looking to conquer, just trade.
What did they bring?
Clocks, which were kind of exotic novelties, but also guns, firearms, and Christianity.
Guns must have changed the game in all that internal fighting.
Absolutely. Suddenly, warfare is different, more deadly. Whoever got the guns had a potential advantage. It intensified the struggle for control. We see clans trying to seize the capital using this new tech.
Did the big, powerful clans just dominate then?
Not necessarily. There were some surprising turns. Smaller clans sometimes won key victories, and new leaders started to emerge from the chaos. Figures who had a bigger vision, unifying the whole country again.
Like Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Those figures.
Exactly, those types.
Yeah.
Ambitious, ruthless sometimes, but focused on bringing Japan back under one rule.
And eventually one of them succeeded. Hideyoshi.
Well, Hideyoshi made huge progress, and then Tokugawa Ieyasu finished the job after Hideyoshi's death. Ieyasu was the one who really consolidated power.
How did he cement control after all that war?
One famous move was the sword hunt, confiscating weapons from everyone except the samurai, basically disarming the populace to prevent further uprisings. Plus, he set up a very strict system of rules and controls over the daimyo.
Okay, so Japan is unified. What then? Did they look outwards?
Hideyoshi, before his death, actually did. He launched massive invasions of Korea with the ultimate aim of maybe even conquering China.
How did that go?
Not well. They ultimately failed, got bogged down in Korea. Huge cost, little gain.
So after Hideyoshi and his failed expansion, Ieyasu takes over. Does he try again?
No. Tokugawa Ieyasu established a new, stable government, the Tokugawa Shogunate. He learned from the past. Power was centralized in Edo, which is modern-day Tokyo.
And the emperor? Still around?
Still in Kyoto, still symbolically important, but the Tokugawa shoguns held the real power. This setup lasted for over 250 years.
Wow. And wasn't this the period when Japan closed itself off?
Exactly. Ieyasu and his successors implemented the Sakoku policy, the closed country. They expelled almost all foreigners, banned Japanese from leaving, and restricted trade to just a tiny Dutch outpost in Nagasaki.
Why fear of foreign influence? Christianity.
All of the above, probably.
Yeah.
They wanted stability, control, and saw foreign interaction as potentially destabilizing after the turbulent preceding centuries.
So Japan just stagnated for 2 centuries.
Not at all. That's the fascinating part. Internally, it was a period of peace and significant development. The population grew massively. Cities like Edo and Osaka became huge commercial centers.
So the economy grew.
Definitely. Roads were built, agriculture improved, and culture flourished too. Think kabuki theater, haiku poetry, woodblock prints like Hokusai's Wave.
Ukiyo-e?
Right. That's it. A vibrant, unique urban culture developed. And even though they were isolated, they weren't totally ignorant of the outside world.
How so? Through the Dutch.
Precisely. Dutch studies Rengaku emerged. Scholars learned Dutch to read European books on science, medicine, astronomy, military tech. It was a small window, but it kept some knowledge flowing in.
But that window eventually got smashed open, didn't it?
Oh, yes. Enter the United States, 1853. Commodore Perry arrives with his black ships.
Gunboats?
Yep.
Yeah.
Basically steamed into Edo Bay and said, you are going to open up for trade. Or else.
That must have been a profound shock.
Absolutely. After over 200 years of carefully controlled isolation, suddenly this overwhelming foreign military power is on your doorstep making demands.
Did they have any choice?
Not really, not against that kind of firepower. They signed treaties, first with the U.S., then Britain, Russia, other powers. The doors were forced open.
How did people react internally? Was everyone okay with this?
Far from it. It caused a huge crisis. A lot of samurai and lords were furious, felt it was humiliating. It destabilized the shogunate's authority.
So this leads to the end of the shogunate.
Exactly. There was resistance, conflict, and ultimately a movement to restore the emperor to power, though the power he got was very different from the old days. The shogun was overthrown.
The Meiji Restoration.
That's at 1868.
Yeah.
And this new Meiji government realized Japan was way behind the West, militarily and industrially. So they launched this incredibly rapid modernization program.
Adopted Western everything.
Pretty much. Government structures, a constitution, a modern army and navy based on Western models, industrial technology, education systems, a complete transformation. Incredibly fast.
And part of being a modern Western-style power back then often meant empire.
Unfortunately, yes. Japan quickly developed its own imperial ambitions. They wanted resources, security, international standing.
Where did they expand first?
Korea was a major target. They eventually annexed it. Then they clashed with Russia over influence in Manchuria and Korea.
The Russo-Japanese War. That was a big deal, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Japan winning against a major European power.
Huge shockwaves around the world, and really announced Japan as a new major power on the scene.
So, heading into the 20th century, Japan is modernized, militarized, and has an empire. What about World War I?
They joined on the side of the Allies, Britain, France, Russia, because they had an alliance with Great Britain.
Did they gain anything?
Yes, they took over German colonies in the Pacific and expanded their influence in China while the European powers were busy fighting each other. They also joined the League of Nations afterwards.
Okay, but things started to go downhill after that, right? The economy.
The Great Depression hit Japan hard, just like everywhere else. Economic hardship, social unrest. And in that climate, the military gained even more influence over the government.
Becoming more aggressive.
Much more. In 1931, the army invaded Manchuria, basically defying the civilian government and the League of Nations.
Did the League do anything?
They condemned it but couldn't really stop it. Japan just walked out of the League. It was a clear sign they were going their own way. Then they pushed further into China, leading to full-scale war there by 1937.
And this leads towards World War II.
Directly, Japan allied itself with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, the Axis powers. Their expansionist ambitions clashed directly with the U.S. presence in the Pacific.
Pearl Harbor.
December 7, 1941. That brought the U.S. into the war and led to years of brutal fighting across the Pacific.
Ending with the atomic bombs.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki. August 1945. Unprecedented destruction, leading to Japan's surrender.
And then occupation.
Yes, the U.S. occupied Japan for several years. They oversaw the writing of a new democratic constitution, dismantled the military empire, and set Japan on a completely new path.
But the story doesn't end there. Japan's post-war recovery was incredible, wasn't it?
Astonishing. The economic miracle. From utter devastation, they rebuilt and became an economic superpower, especially in electronics and cars. Sony, Toyota. Household names worldwide.
That incredible growth eventually slowed down, right?
It did, yeah. They faced economic challenges from the 90s onwards. But Japan remains a major, prosperous, and influential country. A peaceful, democratic nation, totally transformed from its imperial past.
So looking back at this whole sweep, what a ride. From isolated islands formed by rising seas through samurai and shoguns, isolation, rapid modernization, empire, war, and then rebirth as an economic giant.
It's an incredible story of change, adaptation, resilience, constant transformation, really, sometimes driven from within, sometimes forced from outside.
When you think about that whole journey, what really stands out? Is there one moment or development that seems the most pivotal or maybe the most surprising?
That's a tough question. Maybe the sheer speed of the Meiji Restoration or the cultural flourishing during political chaos. It's hard to pick just one.
Yeah, definitely food for thought. And if you want to explore more, there's so much depth, isn't there? You could dive into specific cultural eras like the Heian period, really unpack the samurai code, or look closer at the complex path of modernization and its consequences in the 20th century. Lots to think about.